Hey, okay, we're not going to keep it so formal at the rostrum. My name is Bikesh. Thank you very much for joining us today. So I founded iTrain and with my partner Eric over here about over a decade ago, and our goal was to basically just teach people best practices. We were all in the software industry. We basically built a lot of systems out there about a decade ago and even till today. And we saw a lot of people that when we hired just didn't have the concepts of best practices. The whole idea what we created iTrain was to teach people how to build software correctly. So this was before apps, and then when the iPhone came up and Android came up, we were one of the first few people in the world to basically build content to teach people how to build apps. In fact, we worked with Google and Apple to get our programs throughout major universities. So in Indonesia, we've got universities running our program, Philippines, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, even in the Middle East and Singapore. Because we work with so many developers, we found so many great people, people started asking us new questions about sort of just technical, how to build stuff. They started asking questions about the business then. How do I monetize? How do I market? How do I basically be successful from an app developer perspective? So we actually created another company, which I basically now focus on, and Eric focuses on iTrain. It's called Lead Ventures, 1337 Ventures. So we're setting up the accelerator here in Indonesia on March 28. We're working with the local partners, Convergence, along with some other counterparts from China, to basically find great developers in Indonesia and invest in them and make you grow your company itself. So if you heard of companies like Crave, that's the ones from Convergence. These people are involved to basically mentor and help guide local startups. So this evening at 6 o'clock, we're actually here still today, and we're accepting pitchings, people who want to pitch app ideas to us. So a little bit about that also. So again, just about iTrain Asia, we now focus on mobile development trainings all around Asia. These are just some of the countries that we basically focus on, where our training partners are. And once you finish our courses, you get this certificate itself. So a lot of our startups in Malaysia now and the rest of the countries we are in are using this as their benchmarks to hire. Because if you can get this cert from us, it shows that you have a certain level of competence in terms of building applications itself. So that's basically how it works. All right, so let's get into the content in terms of where things are, where trends are going, and if you are an aspiring new developer, what are areas you should focus on? Because I think our audience here is a mix between students, and we got outsiders and corporates, so it's a mixed bag itself. So let's talk about the state of the mobile ecosystem. So before that, I want to just talk about the population in general. Here we are, Southeast Asia. I've always been a fan more of Asia than the whole Silicon Valley stuff. I can't stand the word Silicon Valley. I think this is the best place to be right now. If you talk about Southeast Asia, we already have a population of 627 million people. If you consider Asia with China and India, the US and Europe market is pretty much dwarfed. They're nothing compared to what you are. So for you to be born here and have a startup here in this part of the world, this is the place you want to be itself. In fact, you see a lot of foreigners coming to Asia to set up because this is the next big wave. So check the first box. You are in the right place, the right country, the right population size, the right everything to start a great mobile ecosystem. And the other thing that's quite nice about this part of the world is people are young. Look at this crowd itself. The average age is about 35 years here in Asia itself. So that means you have young, hip people, you have people that understand technology, willing to adopt new technologies itself. So it's a good age group to basically launch different things on. And if you look at the income per capita itself, that's also growing steadily itself. Compared to the global average, where we are in Indonesia, and Philippines, and Malaysia, you pretty much double the global average. So there are young people, people with accessible income now. These are your yuppie crowds. These are the people who spend hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars on Clash of Clans. How many people are here at Clash of Clans? Clash of Clans. Am I the only one? Don't tell me, right? Who's moved on to Clash Royale and started wasting money there too? Come see me, let's form a clan after this. Okay. So you see people are having disposable income, right? Some of them maybe not so disposable, and I'll show you what Google's basically starting to do right now to get your money too. So in terms of the internet adoption, no, it's a good thing because you're going to be developers. You want them to help you get money. If not, how the hell are you going to get money, right? You don't want to be a poverty nation of app developers. You want to be a high income nation of app developers. That's our goal. That's our goal. So in terms of even internet adoption, it's steadily growing. So we expect that by 2020, there'll be 62% of coverage of internet connected users in Southeast Asia in general itself. So it's a big number itself. So right now we are towards the 33, 35, 37, less than 40% of penetration in the whole Southeast Asia itself. If you want specific numbers for Indonesia, I've got slides for that, but I'm not going to go into that detail. And what we've also seen is, because of the whole connectivity, people are using the internet more than TV. Okay? Anyone agrees with this? Well, the last time you watched TV or you watched Netflix, or now there's a new one called iFlix, right? So everyone's streaming, or some of you may not be paying for the services, but it's torrenting it to death and using it for free in your own media service. I'm guilty as charged for that, all right? So people are spending more time online, consuming from all perspectives and stuff. And when we talk about mobile penetration, this is where it's shocking itself in terms of the Southeast Asia countries. The global average at 98%, we are by far double that. That means the average person here in Asia has 1.6 phones in your pockets. The 0.6 could be because you got a Windows phone, it's not fully a phone. I'm just kidding. All right. So basically, mobile penetration is pretty high. Mobile internet is also there. I'm not saying that internet connections on mobile is fantastic yet, but it is usable to the point it's usable itself. Okay. Also quite interesting as you go down this chart from the west to the east, so like US, UK to Indonesia and India. So the yellow icons, if you can see from far, represents mobile devices, and the more orange ones are laptops and also desktops. So quite interesting is, across the different kind of vertical of tasks that you basically perform, as you go to more developing nations like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, it's all mobile centric. So you can see like instant messaging, well, the whole world will use a mobile phone, that's for sure. Games is on mobile. But when you have access to social networks, developing countries primarily still on laptops, desktops itself. But here in Asia, we are on mobile. When it talks about online banking, again, here in Asia is primarily mobile. Buying products online, streaming videos. So if you look at India, that's one of the countries that is completely, everything is on mobile centric itself, right? They all live on mobile itself. So that's basically stuff that you need to understand. The more you come to developing nations, the easier it is to basically get on mobile, and the penetration is basically booming. So if you're going to build services, it's always going to be a mobile first approach. Not a mobile only approach. You're still going to go to conventional, but you'll always put mobile as a first step. All right. Now in terms of smartphone penetrations itself, I won't say that the entire Southeast Asia has a drastic increase on year in terms of smartphone penetrations. It is big, so if you include China, but the rate of it being adopted was slow ever since 2014. But lately, you've seen this boom. Well, you gotta thank Google for one of that. You gotta thank Google for one of that. Do you guys know what this is? The Android One project? Anyone heard of Android One? So Android One, what Google basically thought was, look, there's a lot of cheap Android phones out there, especially in China, right? But the problem when you try and deploy apps, because we had some teams we invested in terms of games, we made some beautiful games, and we made it very Chinese focused. It did well in places like Taiwan. We were minting like 8,000 US dollars a day to that perspective. But when we wanted to take it to China, it completely crumbled and died. First thing the publisher says is, oh, we can't deploy anything that's bigger than 250 meg. We're not bothered to deploy a 2.5 meg app or 8 meg app because you built it on Unity, and your SDK itself, the base layer, is going to be a couple of megs there. They don't want shit like that, right? They want it really simple, that it works on the mass market. Talking about how many billion people there. But the billion people are not using Samsung Galaxy phones and all those kind of range of phones. They're using brands that you never freaking heard of. Even all the Oppo stuff is considered branded. Most of them are not on those particular brands. So when they want to publish stuff, they want to publish for mass market. So they want apps that can run on every single thing. So lowest common denominator, 250 megabytes. What kind of crap can you deploy on that, right? So what Google basically came up with was specifications for all kind of OEM manufacturers to say, why can't you build a high performance Android phone? We give you the specs in terms of how to build the best at the minimum level itself. But it's going to cost you nothing more than what, 100 US dollars was the max itself. So they went from 75 to 100 US dollars. But you see this kind of initiative also happened from different players. Firefox was basically launching their HTML5 only phone. That was a 75 US dollar phone itself. And they're taking this to developing markets like South Africa and Indonesia and South America and places like that. So because of the rise of these kind of phones that can still run Android M, Android N, Lollipop and all those particular versions and run it well, but it's still cheap, you get a lot of people now adopting technology itself. So that's become a vast increase of smartphone penetrations. And because of that, I think that basically worked hand in hand, and Google has planned this from day one itself. They announced this thing called the sub-dollar pricing. Anyone heard of that? Okay, good thing you guys came here. So everyone always knows that the typical app was 99 cents for the longest time, right? From Apple and Android itself, from Google. So what Google's realized is a US dollar, although it sounds cheap, a US dollar over here is how many thousands? How much? 13,000. It sounds quite expensive, right? Even in Malaysia, 1 US dollar now is stupid. It's like close to 5 ringgit. It went down a little bit, but it's close to 5 ringgit, when it used to be just 3 ringgit. So when people think about buying 50 gems, 500 gems for 4.99, it's like, oh shit, it used to be just like less than 20 ringgit. Now it's close to 50, 60 ringgit itself. You think twice before you want to basically buy stuff. So the idea is, why can't you price it sub-dollar, below 99 cents? So like here, an example in India, they're now basically being able to charge stuff, it's 10 rupees. 10 rupees is how much? I don't even think 10 pay for that. 10 rupees is like 1 ringgit. 1 ringgit is US 20 cents, 30 cents maximum, in fact lesser. So now you can buy that. So imagine now you have people who are young, people who have disposable income, maybe not as big disposable, but still some disposable. Now you give them the ability for the 627 million people to buy things which they never had access to. So instead of $1, now you get 10 cents from that. 600 million times 10 cents is still a freaking lot of money. So you see that there are new avenues for you to go in and monetize from in-app purchases specifically, or just one-off purchases. But we'll talk about that later on. So, I mean, Google has announced this already. I know Apple already may be testing this with some of our developers. We've got into the pilot program at Apple to launch these things too. So it's coming your way. Is it fully commercialized here in Indonesia for this year? It's already rolled out, right? And they have also now figured out how they can basically work with telcos. I'll leave it to David to talk to you more about that itself. All right. So in terms of time that average new media consumer here in Asia spends, Malaysia is considered one of the lowest. We only spend 20 hours a week. So we only spend 1 day of a week on the internet. Sounds very bad. But in Indonesia, you're very close to 23 hours of the week. In fact, this room, I'm sure it's more like 7 days a week you're on the freaking internet. Don't kid ourselves here. So more and more people are accessing online and staying online itself. From the morning, by the time you wake up, what's the first thing you do when you wake up? I check how many people raided my clan. That's what I do. Who I need to revenge when I'm sitting on the toilet. And basically opening up the new gold and silver chest in Clash Royale. That's my daily morning routine itself. I'm sure most of you guys do that too. So from the morning itself, as you wake up, the first thing you look at is your phone. And throughout the whole day, compared to listening to the radio, who listens to the radio anyway? If you listen to radio, it's called Spotify, right? So all the traditional media has basically evaporated, and the internet has been supreme. If you look at in terms of the peaks, lunchtime and evening time, and in terms of devices, mobile is always all around. What's interesting is you see tablets rise mostly in the evenings. So this is when you go back home, you're lying in bed before you wind down. You use your tablet because you don't want to squint on your phone. You want to play Clash of Clans on a big ass screen, so you don't so you don't have to zoom so much on your creepy phone. So basically, everyone's consuming media that way itself. So those were the days you saw people walking around looking at billboards on the screens, but you can't do that anymore. These days, everyone's looking on the ground. Everyone's looking at the floor as they walk. So if you're still buying billboard ads, you're a moron, right? Traditional ads are going away. People realize I'm not going to spend $10,000, $20,000 on a billboard, on print. I'm going to take $10,000, go to Google. I'm going to get a crazy lot more impressions on that online media compared to basically traditional media. So how you find customers and approach them? Everything has to be a mobile approach these days itself. Okay? In terms of, like I mentioned, since 2013, 2014, the rise of the cheap smartphones have been so predominantly here in Asia. It's surpassed basically the West market itself, the developed nations in terms of smartphone penetration itself. So you are in the right place for a growing smartphone market, a growing mobile ecosystem. And Indonesia, like I said, you guys spend more time a day, right? So Indonesia is the highest, 181 minutes a day on your phone. 3 hours a day on your phone. But the average for Asia will be 2.5 hours. So you guys above average. Congratulations. Congratulations on your particular achievement in Indonesia. Because of traffic, yes. Because you're stuck in traffic most of the time, you have to take out your phone here, right? So that's one of the main contributing factors. So anyone knows, in terms of, we know you spend 3 hours, right? But how many times a day do you look at your phone? Do you guys ever encountered, you needed to count that? How many times do you think you look at your phone a day?
20.
20 times? Your head 20 times. No way 20 times. 20 long hours of looking at it possibly itself. 100, it's a little bit more. It's about 150 times a day, which then equates to the average of 162 minutes. So 150 times a day, you just look at your phone, who rated you, where your particular next card request comes from. And then there's always been this whole argument between apps and sites. Which one do I do first, mobile sites or just a mobile app, Android versus iOS? So I'm going to address all those things. So let's talk about apps and sites first. So predominantly at one point in time, everyone said apps rule everything. It has to be apps first. So there's been a lot of studies. So these stats all come from Google itself, from some of their research work in Asia. Time spent on your phone, 86% is on an app, 14% is on a site. So therefore they say yes, apps win. But let's drill down a little bit more and figure out, if you were to launch something, what's your competition like with the app stuff? So again, 86%. If you break down the 86%, 40% of that is games. So if you're not building a game, 40% is gone already. The rest of the 26% is on social media. I'm not talking about Google+, talking about something else. So that's already 66%. And then 20% is the other itself. That's where your Tinder comes in, all right? So where is space for your particular app? You have a small area for you to compete with, so you gotta basically be smart about that. But if you then break down this 14% in terms of commercial, or rather the whole thing based on commercial tasks, from all the 86% of engagement on your phone, for commercial tasks, only 6% is performed on your mobile app. So that's a drastic thing. That means the rest of it, people prefer a little bit of both, but 66% of commercial tasks is still from a mobile web. Why do you think that's so? So if you wanted to buy something, you won't just use an app. You'd still go to the web. Why? Anyone take a wild guess? Students, your lecturer will give you points for this. Well, one reason is definitely because you want to get the collective of what other people are saying about stuff. So if I'm going to buy a product, I'm not just going to go to the app that sells the product and say, buy it. I want to know what other people are saying about it. I want to see ratings and reviews and things like that. So predominantly that's available on the web. So that's why Google is still king on mobile, right? If you want to buy something, you still go on a Google search, you'll search for that, see what other people are talking about that, then possibly return back to the app and do that. That's why in the US, they have the app called Best Buy, right? Where you can buy any product from the phone. But what they noticed in Best Buy was when people go to Best Buy, they see the price there, then they start Googling it, Amazon and this and that and eBay, finding other places you can get it really cheap. They know behaviors that way. So what Best Buy did as a policy in the stores was to say that if you can Google and find a price that's cheaper than mine, I'll give you that price so you still buy it from my store. So they use that kind of knowledge to their advantage itself to basically get the market. So a pretty smart way itself. So predominantly people still want to go to a site and find stuff. So what does that tell you as an app developer? It basically tells you that you got to think about how you open up your app. When you open up your app, don't just keep it as a silo. There should be ways that you can have ratings and reviews. You do Facebook Connect or some other ways you can basically connect to social media and show what other people are talking about your product in your product. So don't put your users in a silo. Still give them the ability to find out what's happening outside about your product, because people want to be sure about those things. They want to see peer reviews. And that's the approach that you see what happens in games. You do Facebook Connect, you see your other friends playing, you compete with them, you still keep it open and stuff, right? So when he talks about the whole e-commerce journey itself, from buying things on mobile or the internet, every process of buying, the number one particular choice of medium for consumers is the internet. So this is newspaper, print, TV, radio. That means when you become interested, let's say Samsung Galaxy S7 just launches, right? You read about it online. Would you wait 1 month for your favorite Stuff magazine or some kind of T3 magazine to go to your shop like, oh, so that's what the S7 can do? Obviously nobody does that, right? Nobody waits 1 month for a publication to come out and figure out, So that's what iPhone 7 is going to do. You would see the live stream, you would see someone like me, I would live tweet the whole damn thing for everything that's announced. You'd follow people like that and find out immediately, and you want to know right there and then, should I buy this, right? You wouldn't wait anymore. So the internet plays a big role, and mobile plays a bigger role for that in terms of consumer adoptions and e-commerce. So the prediction is smartphones and tablets are going to boost online retail by over 400 billion a year come 2018 itself. And there's a reason for that, because we're nowhere close to matching e-commerce to retail now. For global, for Asia, it's only 1 to 2% for e-commerce compared to retail. That's how far it is. So I want to drill down more on the mobile side in terms of, I want to talk about two platforms that make sense. It's iOS or Android. If you're doing anything else, it's a complete waste of time. Yes, you can talk about the BlackBerry, but you know what's the BlackBerry's market share right now? Global? It's like 0.2%. Windows is even more powerful than that, 2.2. Woo! Okay. Everything else is basically going to be iOS and Android. So this was the last stats for end of last year in terms of vendors shipping phones. Samsung is of course king. Apple is the only one that does iOS, but there's a string of others that do Android. That's the beauty of it. Why Android is so big is because you got Samsung, you got Huawei, you got Lenovo. In fact, Huawei has been one of the big contributors to also the smartphone penetration because they grew more than 44%. Huawei is also creating this entry-level, very high spec but very cheap, but ugly kind of phones. But it still works, right? But if you break it down by operating system, so you combine all the manufacturers by their OS, then of course, for 2015, Android shipped was that 1 million. That's like a billion devices itself. iOS at 226 million. So easier way to see this, Android for end of last year is about 82% of the market. Would you even think of building for anything else first? iOS, even Apple was one of the world's biggest companies, is only at 15.8%. Microsoft at 2.2%. Others are all the others, the Blackberries, the Bada, the Tizens, and so on and so forth, the Firefox OS. So that's why here in Asia, if you're going to build a mobile approach, the first thing you always think about is, of course, going to be Android. Of course, the first thing you can think about is doing mobile web, so it's a little bit accessible by everyone, even Blackberries and Windows phones. But Android's primarily the main thing you see most developers basically do, especially startups. Why? Another reason is the quick turnaround. If you wanted to make an app update because there was a bug or some new things you wanted to launch, you could practically get it into the App Store and update it within less than 20 minutes. Basically goes live. But when you come to iOS, you are at the mercy of Apple. I mean, you got to be lucky if you think you're going to get that done in 2 weeks, 1 week, or expedite the particular process itself. So especially when it comes to bug fixing, going iOS straight away as your first approach is quite dangerous. So normally it's always an Android approach. And you see this happen in apps like Facebook and Instagram. They all have beta access programs for these apps on Android only, so that they test this on the initial base of users, find out anything that doesn't work, and then put the live changes onto iOS itself. So Android users are always the guinea pigs, but you have many of them. All right. So the 81%, if you break it down, so this is where people always complain about Android. It's so freaking defragmented, there's so many versions. So this is the latest stat as of last week, 7th of March. The big fives are Lollipop, which is the version 5, KitKat version 4, and Jelly Bean version 4 also. So 3 main dominating particular versions. So if you wanted to build something for the latest API from Google and use some of the killer new features, and you're going to Marshmallow, then you only have 2.3% of users. So the whole idea when you approach this kind of stuff is, you build for the common denominator. If you're building common feature sets and you're not using any groundbreaking kind of particular API, then there's no issue. You can basically deploy this on all kinds of phones and stuff. So it doesn't have to be an issue of a defragmented market depending on what you're trying to build. The more bleeding edge you go, the smaller your particular user base is going to basically get. Okay? But when you compare to iOS, so here it's a unique situation because Apple controls both the operating system and the hardware rollouts. So they can say that every time they roll out a new version of the OS, it forces you to update, or they have basically ways to distribute it on all the devices. But if you talk about Android, and they're basically putting it on Huawei, on Samsung, or it could be even Samsung that is basically distributed with your version of the telco, then you need to wait for that particular ROM to get out for yours itself. So that's where it gets a little bit more difficult. You got to wait for the custom OS built for your particular device. But for iOS, it's just one device that rules them all. So if you talk about, as of last week, 80% of the phones out there, that means the hundreds and hundreds of millions of devices, run iOS 9. Doesn't mean they run it fast, it just means it runs it iOS 9 itself. And then remaining is iOS 8, and there's still some older versions, those people on iPhone 4 and all will not upgrade itself. So if you want to put a new feature set that Apple talks about swankily on the stage, you already have a captive audience always at every point of time. So that's the benefit of going iOS. So a little bit of both. So as a developer, which would you choose? iPhone, Android, or argue face the Microsoft, also Windows Phone? Would you do all three? Well, only 37% of developers out there target iOS and Android. Some of them don't even target any of them themselves. So that's basically where you are if you want to do all three. What we basically tell, especially startups, is you do one and you do one right before you talk about all the other platforms itself. And Android's always the case. If you want to test pilot something, mobile web is always the best. It gets across all. Mobile web, especially HTML5, can do offline, can do a lot of stuff that basically the apps could do. In fact, mobile web is a little bit more easier to get discovered because you can share the links all about. But getting apps discovered is more harder because of the competition you basically have. So here is the slide about the competition. If you were to launch a game, this is specifically only for the App Store for iOS. I've not put in the Google ones, which will be quite similar in terms of the numbers. There's over 500,000 games on the App Store. So if you basically launch your game, you're competing with 500,000 people, or you're competing with Supercell's advertising budget. So what would you do? It's not impossible. David's going to talk more about how you get noticed on things like that. You need a strategy. But where you want to basically look at this chart is, look at what's close to number 2 and number 3 itself, right? You've got education and you've got business apps. These are different kind of verticals that some developers have not been thinking of. The fact that smartphones are going everywhere here in Asia, you're getting developing nations, especially affordable phones, it's in the hand of every single child these days, a cheap Android phone. So imagine what you could do with that. You could build an education platform, an education-based game, something that skews along those lines itself, okay? And also the business-centric itself. A lot of companies are saying BYOD, bring your own devices to work. People are looking for tasks that I want to perform in the office on my own mobile devices. So if you're a traditional-based company and your infrastructure doesn't allow it, corporations don't have avenues of doing their ERP, CRM systems on mobile, here's an avenue of something you could think of. A lot of information workers want these solutions, but it's not readily available out there. So that is also a captive market. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the coming slides in terms of monetization. Okay? So you've seen developers conquer the whole world of mobile and apps. Over 9 million app developers just on iOS. On Android will basically be the same. 800,000 new developers on iOS every single year. That's a ridiculous amount. More than 2 million apps on the App Store. Over, I don't even know how to pronounce that number. It's like 1 billion devices out there for iOS. iOS means iPhone, iPod Touch, and iPads. And over 100 billion downloads just on the App Store. And $25 billion paid out by Apple. Google, I think, is more, what, 7 billion already? It's already 7 billion just on Google itself. So it's a big economy. But things are moving out of this. So I want to talk about the future of mobile also, and is it still mobile? So now you see developers conquer the next thing, right? The risk. You got all this IoT and these personal devices. Anyone here crazy enough bought an Apple Watch? Okay, that speaker has an Apple Watch. Fine, there you go. Okay, there's about 10,000 apps in there. Do you download apps for the Apple Watch? What's your favorite one? What's the one you use every day?
For the to-do list.
The to-do list. Okay, all right, there you go. Android Wear. Anyone has Android Wear? Of course. You better have Android Wear. Okay. And the first one that really got the ball rolling was the Pebble itself. Anyone has the Pebble? All right. So basically, developers are moving on to the next screen, right? From the screens in your pockets down to the screens on your wrist. So you build supporting apps to basically figure out how you can work with both. The next thing that people are moving on to, not so fast, but it's already starting, developers are trying to conquer the car. So now, have you heard of this too? Apple has something called CarPlay, and Android has something called Android Auto. It's basically a dashboard that you put on your car, and most of this dashboard runs both. So it's not like I only have to buy a CarPlay or Android Auto and I can't decide. All these manufacturers that OEM it runs both inside depending on your phone you connect, right? So it's easy. So developers are trying to figure out how to build media for your particular car itself. So of course this is a whole dangerous thing. You don't want to be doing Clash of Clans as you drive, although I love it. I wish they'd do that. But so far it's been very media focused in terms of entertainment and goes to your car device itself. But then you're going to see this evolve because the APIs are open. So there's a whole list of startups out there working on this already. You also see developers moving into the home context. So it's not just mobile app. It's talking about IoT and smart homes and things like that. You've seen Apple launch HomeKit, and what is Google recently just launched for the whole IoT stuff? Anyone knows? Project Brillo? Okay, I might look it up. So there's a whole set of things. Google also bought this thing called Nest, which was an IoT thermostat thing for your house, and now they're basically opening up the APIs to control the entire house itself. I live in a smart home, and I hate it. I think it's the stupidest thing, because sometimes the house reboots itself and you sit in the dark. I think we're not there yet, but it's coming. It's coming. Okay. Now you also see developers take to the sky, right? The whole drone thing. You basically have DJI, is the guy who created the Phantom. They basically have a developer program. They've also got this thing, OS for commercial drones. So there's lots of different commercial aspects of drones, not just spying on your friends and family, but people are taking this towards agri-tech. Agriculture-based businesses, they want to figure out how to use the drone tech in different things. In Malaysia, what's scary is the cops are using this now. They're going to use this to do patrolling areas rather than patrol cars, and they already have a proof of concept. I don't want a freaking drone fly to my window and look at me. So it's going to cause a whole uproar of another riot here happening in Malaysia soon, so that's great. All right. So developers are conquering pretty much everything, right? From cities to healthcare to clothing. You've seen cloth tech, right? Google has launched those things. From factories and every single thing developers are on board. But when you look at the common things between Asia and US, pretty much the apps that do well from Asia and the US, paid or non-paid, exactly the same. So when you build here for stuff, it's stuff that you can still ship to the US. Behavior is still pretty much the same, there's no difference. What's sad is, in terms of the number of localized apps, that is still severely below the threshold of like 40% itself. Like Indonesia, Malaysia, all these developing nations, you don't see as many local home-grown apps. And that's why we do this kind of events, to inspire more developers to build stuff, to build for local first, if not regional and then global itself. Because you are already a captive audience of how many 100 million here in Indonesia. You don't have to think about building the next Clash of Clans. You can think about something more in the local context first, because your local is still freaking huge, okay? What's interesting when you look at this is some older stats, but as of end of 2013, you started seeing Asian countries already pop up in terms of the top revenue generators for apps itself. It used to predominantly be United States as the top one, then you started seeing Japan in 2013, and eventually Japan has surpassed the US in terms of monetization from app stores. What's also interesting is, again, as of end of December 2013, look at the blue chart. Everyone always thought that you can't make money on the Play Store. But it's proved that the Play Store revenue streams are quadrupling, if not more than that itself. So you can monetize Android. Google has worked so hard to get operators and telcos to be on part of this, so everywhere there's a way to monetize a user on the Android platform. So it's really good to basically get on this platform right now. In fact, in terms of the Asian countries doing well in the App Store, it's still predominantly Japan and South Korea and China, sheer volume, and also it's mostly games. So don't think of this as a deterrent, think of this as opportunity. There's so much more left for the rest of our countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and Philippines in terms of creating revenue itself. When you talk about distribution of revenue from these countries, you can see the blue ones are Google Play stores. You don't see it in China because Google Play is not officially in China, but the whole idea is there is a significant revenue coming from the Play Store. So don't discount the fact that you can't make money on Google, you can, and this time is now itself. Okay? In terms of downloads from the App Store between iPads and iPhones, predominantly it's always iPhone. For iPads, if you're thinking about that, the key takeaway from this slide is iPads are predominantly entertainment and education-based apps. People want big screens for that. So if you're going to do a universal approach, that's fine. If you're doing iPad-only apps, it's basically those two contexts. And then the next killer thing is always the business model. So this is where you've seen things dramatically change across the last couple of years. So everything now, iPad, iOS, even on Android, it's free. If you're trying to basically sell an app, You gotta be some damn superstar. Even Clash of Clans is not sold as an app because they want an in-app style, right? So if you're gonna make solid premium content as a game and you want to sell it one-off, it's going to be quite hard. That's why you see a lot of game developers, not impossible, but most game developers will still prefer to go on desktop, on Steam, and distribute towards the web, because that's predominantly the model that still has premium-based stuff. But for mobile, if you want people to try and get a big audience, it's got to be an in-app purchase. So if you grow across all the kinds of different business models for different sectors, for education, the blue one is still free. So education you can still sell. In fact, education is one of the most expensive apps. Do you know why? Because one thing for Apple, we've invested in some education apps, so it's a strategy we have to do, although we don't like it. Apple automatically gives you a discount as an educator, right? So if you're buying from a college or university, 50% is slashed, no questions asked. You cannot do anything about it. So a lot of developers will hike up the price by 200% so that they get back the original price they intend in the first place. But that's the discount that they basically get, okay? If you try to get into games, look at that. 92% of games is basically free. So there is still a subset of users that pay for games, but there's got to be really great production values in these particular games and so on, right? When it comes to more serious stuff like navigation and medical, then you see predominantly those are paid apps where there's a lot of value bring to it and it's something that you can't find out in the market. You've got some kind of niche, then you basically do a paid app if you have a strong niche in something and so on. Okay, in terms of countries, please let me know how I'm doing on time. If not, I'll talk till the end of the day. I've got lots to say. In terms of countries, now the bars are reversed. The red ones are in-app. You can see it across Asia. It's not per country itself. It's pretty much predominantly all in Asia. It's because we are cheapskates in Asia, right? We like our apps free. Predominantly has always been a free-based thing. So the question I would think people always ask is, so can you truly make money? A lot of governments, especially Malaysia, we spend so much time and money creating developer programs thinking you can become a high-income nation when you teach people how to code and build an app. You become a billionaire, a millionaire straight away. So let's talk about, does that even work? So this is the poverty line for apps. So that means that 1 in 9 developers are in the safe zone that can make $10,000 and above in a month. Not bad. But the rest of everybody else is making either $500 or nothing. Most people are making on the nothing side itself. So if you wanted to be into the app economy and make money, what are things you could do to basically skew it towards your favor itself? So if you look at in terms of where money is made in apps, the big chunk of it is actually in e-commerce. That means the app enables other services rather than the app itself. If you just talk about app sales, that's a $40 billion market. But if you talk about an app that does e-commerce like Amazon on the side, they make $300 billion itself. So then you got to think, can you create an e-commerce environment in that app in the first place? Advertising is $34 billion and so on and so forth. So 70% of the app economy, when we talk about the $25 billion, the $7 billion from Google and all, it's controlled by 9% of the developers, right? Like all the big games you basically see, it's coming from the typical game studios that you always heard of. There's only been a couple of the indie developers out there. Eventually, they're still doing well. I think David will speak about more about those guys. They are there, but it's still a small percentage. We're trying to grow those numbers and stuff. So let's talk about the models that you see as monetization. So the first model is apps used as a channel. So this is basically like Amazon or Best Buy saying, you could go to my storefront, you could go to my web, but you still have a mobile app to buy things from my store itself. So you basically can monetize through that. The next thing you basically see is the mobile first solution, where your mobile app is sort of like a remote control. That means the app doesn't really do anything, but it's still an offline thing that does it. An example would be Uber or Gojek. What happens is the car takes you from A to B. That's what you're paying for. But the app is just a means to call the car and to basically transact that way in terms of a remote control to call the car. You click a button, the car comes, a motorbike comes itself. But the app doesn't really do anything because the actual delivery is the car. So you see a lot of what we call these O2O solutions. Offline-based businesses using mobile to go online. Like we have a startup we invested in. She basically sells cakes. Well, we still call her a typical tech startup because she created a platform that allows you to buy a cake and have it to your desktop in 4 hours. She basically sells 400 to 500 cakes a day because now she has an app to basically connect bakers to people who want to buy cakes itself, right? So that's the kind of services you see happening. And the other thing that's happening now, which is scaring people like Google and Apple, is where apps become the platform. And this is where you see, the guys in China has figured that out, right? WeChat. WeChat is not just an app. WeChat is a platform. It's an app that distributes apps internally. It's an app that has a payment gateway inside. It's an app that has everything built into one area. And the next person to do this would be who? You see Uber already starting to plan something like this. Uber also knows they've got an ecosystem, and they could basically do the same on top of this platform. And this is where you, as a developer, still benefit, because you can still make money through them, but these guys want to dominate everything, okay? So in terms of e-commerce, we're still relatively very low in Asia. We're talking about all their transaction is still 1 to 2% of offline. So only Korea and Japan has got double digits in terms of e-commerce to retail. Enterprises, I'm not going to go too much about this, I spoke about this just now. Information workers want to have access to devices, but there's not enough apps on the enterprises. So you look at the poverty line just now, 64% of developers target consumers, only 19% of them make more than $10,000. 20% of developers target enterprises, but 40% of the enterprise developers make more than $10,000 itself. So the enterprise way is one way you can make money. If you look at enterprise categories and consumer categories, there is an overlap. There are things that are very common between utilities for consumer, utilities for enterprise. An example, if you build a consumer bill splitting app, it doesn't take much effort to convert this to something for the corporations for expense accounts and splitting for things like that. You could just spin off another version if you wanted to, Okay? Same as IoT, we found that IoT predominantly is focused on consumers, the guys who want to buy this kind of bands and things like that. Very little is spent on enterprises. But where the money is in for sales and services, it'll be coming from enterprises itself. But there's not enough apps out there for that. So the idea is, can you skew things? Can you take an Apple Watch, a drone, wearables, and make it towards enterprise spin-offs itself? That's something to think about, because the rise of the B2B startups are pretty happening in Asia already. Okay? So apps are moving out of mobile devices and going into other devices that we spoke about. So the traditional app was this. It's just an app, it works as a standalone. You have internet, you don't have internet, you don't care. Can you play Clash of Clans without internet now? You cannot, because it's become a bigger platform now, right? So today, it's called a companion app. The value is delivered from the outside service, not from the app. It's not like the phone is driving you from A to B. It's still a traditional person out there. So it's called a companion app. So what do you think the future app is going to be about? Future app's all about the data. This is where everything's moving. That's why the rise of the IoT is what everyone's talking about. You have all these collection points, you've got all these devices that you're wearing. The data, the analysis, and this whole big data approach coming from that is going to be the big thing for apps now to basically deduce and sell that as a service to the end user itself. So this is where you see people doing. This is where people like Uber and Grab and all these guys are analyzing this kind of data to become the next kind of app itself. Apps that maybe could say, I'm going to predict that you need an Uber before you even know you're an Uber, because it's connected to your schedule, your wife's schedule, your this schedule. It plans an Uber trip for you throughout the whole day without you even doing it. Maybe that's what they want to basically do. So that's how you basically work towards the collective. So previously, the platform kings were device-centric. Now, eventually, it's not going to be about Apple and Google anymore. It's going to be very independent. It's going to be that I have WeChat, I have Uber, you just say that. You don't care what platform you're on because it's all the same, right? You could have access of it to your TV, to your phone, to your laptop. It will be everywhere, it'll be ubiquitous itself. So it's not going to be so much about the hardware, the device anymore. It's going to be talking about the platform. That's going to be the number one. And to prove that's happening is, look at this. They're all investing in the same thing, right? Smart homes, both of them have one. Wearables, both of them have one. Health, both of them have one. Cars, everyone has one. So if you have a car, Google wants to make sure you have their car. And Apple also wants to make sure you're in their car. Even the house, they think about the same thing. Even the runner-ups basically are doing it. Samsung has the same verticals, Microsoft has the same verticals. Everyone's moving to that. The scariest part, even the e-commerce providers are saying that. Amazon wants your phone, Amazon wants your house, JD wants the same thing, and even me wants the same thing. So it's not going to be about Apple and all that anymore. People like Uber will be on everyone's platform. So Uber is Uber. Uber will be the big thing. WeChat will be the big thing. Gojek will be the big thing. So you as a developer, you can be bigger than the devices itself. That's how great the potential is basically going mobile. And it all just starts here, you saying you want to go mobile in the first place, right? IoT solutions, still people are looking for problems for their solutions, we found. Predominantly, IoT is still focused only on smartphones itself. So basically, this is the roadmap that we basically see. Moving forward, from then till now, everyone's going off the mobile phone. It's still predominantly mobile, but mobile in a different context. Mobile for your houses, for your wearables, for your cars, and of course the TVs. So the potential starts now. Just by creating an app, it unleashes a whole ecosystem of other things you basically could do when you build apps itself. All right? So basically, thank you very much for listening to me today. That's the trends moving forward for mobile.